What is going on, everyone? It's OxxyOG, and today we are finally releasing our 11.2 Fury Warrior Guide. In this, I'm going to go over things like gear, talents, rotation. I'm going to go over trinkets, raid versus Mythic Plus, all kinds of things. I'm going to try to cover it all, but anything that I might miss, feel free to start a discussion in the comments. I'd love to talk some more about it. Or if you have any suggestions for me or things that you think might work better, also feel free to mention. I'd love to hear it. So I'm looking forward to a great 11.2 season. I think season 3 is going to be great. We're looking pretty strong, so that's going to make it a lot of fun for us as Fury. And let's get right into it. So first I want to talk about my macros and my weak auras. So for macros, I use a Recklessness and Avatar macro. Very important that you follow it in this order. It's cast Recklessness, cast Avatar, and then cast Blood Fury for it's my passive as an orc. And then you can also do cast like a trinket, similar to House of Cards or something like that. Next, I have my spear. So it's a self-cast spear macro. It casts spear on my feet, and I also have that for Ravager. I do this because I play top down a lot, especially in rooms like buildings. And when I do that, there's always some rogue chandelier up hanging from the ceiling, and when I go to throw my spear down on the ground or my Ravager, it somehow like blinks up onto the chandelier and will go up there and do absolutely nothing. And I was sick of it. So I was like, I'm just going to cast the stuff on my feet. I make sure I'm in the pack, like immersed into the pack when I throw it. And, uh, I'm never really throwing them. I noticed throughout all my gameplay, I'm never throwing my spear like to a place that I'm not, or throwing my Ravager to a place that I'm not. I did used to precast Ravager before I charged, but it was a little bit of a waste of the uh, Hurricane, I think it's called, talent where it's casting Bloodthirst. I would miss like a cast of Bloodthirst while I was charging in. So I started casting it on feet as I got into the pack. Weak auras that I use is the Bloodthirst Crit Tracker weak aura and the Luxthos Warrior Overlay weak aura. So Bloodthirst Crit Tracker will tell you when your Bloodthirst crit chance is over 85%, and it'll light up and make a noise. And it's very useful. Luxthos weak aura is going to be for my cooldowns, my abilities. What you see there in the screenshot, it's what I use as my overlay. Highly recommend it. I'm going to put both of those in the description down in the bottom of the YouTube video. Feel free to download them if you'd like. And any questions about this, let me know. Next, we're going to talk about set bonuses. So first is Slayer. We're going to talk about the two-piece. So I'll just rate it here. It's execute damage increased by 10%, and executes from sudden death have a 10% chance per stack of overwhelmed on the target to trigger a Slayer strike at 100% effectiveness. All right, so the way that overwhelmed works is as you fight the enemy, Blade Storm and also sudden death can put overwhelmed stacks on it, and they stack up to 10. So when you're at 10, you're at like max stacks of overwhelmed. Well, this is 10% chance per stack of overwhelmed. So when you're at 10, you have a 100% chance whenever you use sudden death, basically, to trigger a Slayer strike, which is that like hit that you see your character do randomly. Does a lot of single target damage. The four piece is going to be that Raging Blow damage increased by 10%, and Raging Blow has a 2% chance per stack of overwhelmed on the target to trigger Reap the Storm at 150% effectiveness. So again, going back into the 10 stacks of overwhelmed, well, if you have a 2% chance per stack and there's 10 stacks, you're going to have a 20% chance that a Raging Blow is going to trigger Reap the Storm at 150% effectiveness, which is where you see your character do like a little mini Blade Storm spin when you use Bloodthirst. So that's what the Slayer 2 and 4 piece are. For Thane, we're looking for the 2 piece. It's going to be Thunderblast has a 35% chance to call down 5 ionizing strikes on affected targets. Each strike deals a percent of your attack power as nature damage. And then Mountain Thane 4 set is going to be the ionizing strikes deal 100% more damage. And when you trigger ionizing strikes, you gain a charge of Thunderblast, and your next Thunderblast deals 100% damage. So the way this works is the 2 set has a 35% chance to call down 5 strikes on targets around you. When that happens, your 4 piece causes it to trigger a reset on your Thunder Blast. So you'll use Thunder Blast. It'll if it procs the 35% chance, it'll reset your Thunder Blast immediately, and you'll be able to use it immediately again. Not even off the GCD. Well, it is off the GCD. You're able to just spam it. If you get multiple resets, it pumps damage, considering each one after is all going to be 100% additional damage. So when you get this in big packs, you see your numbers climb, and this is where most of our damage comes from. So when you use Thunder Blast, you want to be spamming it to make sure if you get a reset that you're using it. And if not, then you just continue as always. And that's why it's important to always be farming Thunder Blasts, and I'll go over the Prio for Thane as we get to it. Okay, so that is our set bonuses for this tier. Next, let's talk about the gear and the stats. For the stat priority, we are looking at Strength, Mastery, Haste, Verse, and then Crit Strike. That's the order. At the end of the day, you should always be simming your character. Use SimC or Simulation Craft and sim them to see what upgrades are going to increase your damage by the most. But this is a general rule of thumb: Strength, Mastery, Haste, Verse, and Crit Strike. As far as gear that we're going to be getting throughout this patch, we have the Reshi Wraps that are going to do an on proc chance damage ability, or also chance to heal someone. And it procs pretty often. I think with the coupled boots, I was doing like 5% of my overall damage in Mythic Plus was from the Reshi Wrap procs. So we'll get that. You also can socket, like in this fiber socket, you can put a secondary stat in there. I recommend Verse or Mastery, but really it's going to depend on Sims and your character at the time. I was using Mastery on PTR. Verse is always good. It's like raw damage and also survivability. And then there's also one other thing for the Reshi Wraps, which is it'll be necessary in both open world content in the new area, where you'll be able to enter like the ethereal realm and find different treasures and other things there. And it'll also be actually a mandatory requirement in the raid on multiple bosses. One example I'll give is Plexus Sentinel. It's the first boss. We'll have to be using the active of the Reshi Wraps that like send you into the ethereal realm, or it temporarily disintegrates you and lets you phase through things. So we're going to use it to phase through this wall that would otherwise actually disintegrate you. And so that's the Reshi Wraps. Very useful. Going to be a requirement for everybody. Going to take up your cloak slot. And then these boots drop from the Soul Hunters. It's the 3 Demon Hunter boss that's in the raid, and it's the marketed as optional boss, but they do have a passive that's going to increase the proc rate of your Reshi Wraps by 50%, which is a huge amount considering the damage that the Reshi Wraps are doing. So both of these are going to be pretty much best in slot for us. And lastly, on this slide, we're going to talk about crafted gear and embellishments. So for embellishments, we're going to go for the Writhing Armor Band that doubles the effect of your other embellishment. And then for our main embellishment here, we're going to go with Ascendance on a two-handed weapon that we're going to craft. The Writhing Armor Band can be put on wrists, just similar to how we crafted on wrists last tier. But as I put in the bottom here, early season crafting can differ. Everything is dependent on your vault, what M0 drops you get in the first week, and also what drops you get from your raid clear in the second week. I would consult your guild Discord, consult the warrior Discord, and also just kind of consult your own common sense to see if following what's set out here is the right crafting order for you. We'll be getting a lot of sparks throughout the season, so you don't have to craft what's long-term bis right away. You may want to craft gloves instead of wrists because you already got a wrist drop and they really don't give that great of stats. So take everything with a grain of salt and just kind of see what feels right. Okay, let's talk about the Slayer raid talents. This is the talent build here for raid. This is going to be for multi-target cleave raid fights, not pure single target. I did write some notes here. So first one is that you can fit in 2 raging blows after a blade storm ends unless your enrage is about to run out. This is to stack up your slaughtering strikes. So over on the right side there's a talent called slaughtering strikes, which is every time that you use Raging Blow, it increases your next Rampage's damage by 20% up to 5 stacks. And then there's also, in the keystone in the middle, there's a talent called Brutal Finish, which is that you increase your next Rampage by 50% after Blade Storm ends. So when Blade Storm ends, you want to have 3 stacks of Whirlwind left over because you want to Rampage with 4 stacks of Whirlwind right before you Blade Storm to make sure you have a full Enrage. So Rampage, Blade Storm, you come out of it with 3 stacks of Whirlwind. You use 2 of those stacks on Raging Blow. This is in multi-target, of course. 2 of those stacks on Raging Blow to get 2 stacks of Slaughtering Strikes, increasing that last Whirlwind stack cleaved Rampage by 40% on top of the 50% that you're increasing it off of Brutal Finish. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll show that in a recording that I have later. The second thing is that for pure single target fights, you can drop Improved Whirlwind and Meat Cleaver over on the far right there, the cleave talents. You can drop them for Vicious Contempt, which is basically that your Bloodthirst do 35%, or I'm sorry, 50% increased damage when the enemy is below 35% health. So if it's going to be pure single target, just drop those 2 because you're not going to be cleaving at all, and send it into that, and you'll have a better execute window. Okay, so for the Slayer Mythic Plus talents, very similar to what you'll see on Wowhead, but I just had a couple of notes here. For Champion Spear, I take that over Roar. I do it because it enhances the Blade Storm damage from the crit buff as one of the keystone talents down there. I'll go over that a little more later in a different slide, but just know that you can still take Thunderous Roar and it will still be competitive. Spear does output a bit more damage, but it's nothing game breaking, so feel free to go Roar if you just want to set it, forget it, and just let it do the dot. But if you can utilize Spear properly, it's a great grab. Other thing is that Sudden Death should be used on 4 conditionals. Number 1 is if you have 2 stacks of Sudden Death, because you don't want to be over capping on those stacks. Number 2 is if you have 3 stacks of Marked for Execution. So Marked for Execution, when you have 3 stacks, each stack reduces, when you use Sudden Death, reduces the cooldown of your Blade Storm by 5 seconds per stack. So you want to do this at 3 stacks to maximize that cooldown reduction buff there. 3 is if you're about to drop 5 stacks of Ashen Juggernaut. So Ashen Juggernaut is the crit buff to your execute, and it stacks up to 5 times, and then it goes on a timer, and you have to use it again to keep it stacked up at 5. And if it's about to fall off, you definitely want to use your Sudden Death or execute. Or 4th, if you're about to expire a proc of Sudden Death. So you don't want to just let them go away. They do good damage. They're great, but they're not number 1 in the priority list. You want to try to just make sure you're always meeting one of these 4 conditionals. Okay. Next, we had the Slayer rotation and Prio. So first, I'll play these videos, and then we'll go over the priority on the left there. So this is going to be the single target for the Slayer rotation and Prio, and I'll talk through it here. Before I start it, I want to mention I'm out of combat with this dummy, and this happens in Raid a lot and can also happen in Mythic Plus here and there, like between packs. If you're going into a pack or a boss with 0 rage and you're not in combat, it's very possible that combat won't be triggered right away, and you need to enter it before you use your macro and charge in, or else you won't have enough rage to use a rampage at the start and then get into your Blade Storm. So what you do is you can either use Whirlwind during your charge, mainly in AoE, to generate that extra rage and get cleave stacks going, or you want to use Heroic Throw in single target, which will trigger combat, and then use your macro and charge in. So let's play this. So we use Heroic Throw, charge in, we get our Thunderous Roar out, and then we use our Blade Storm. After Blade Storm, you see I spam Raging Blow 3 times, and then I don't get any more resets, and then I send the Rampage. This increased my Rampage damage by 60% from Slaughtering Strikes, and then 50% from the Brutal Finish. So it was a massive Rampage there. So it's a small optimization, but if you get into the habit of it, it's like second nature, and it's great. All right, so that is the single target. Feel free to rewatch it. That's the single target damage rotation there for Slayer. Now for multi-target, you will see as I charge in, I use a Whirlwind so that I get my whirlwind stacks right away mid charge and don't really lose a global, because you can use abilities while you're some abilities while you're charging. So as I'm charging, I use a whirlwind so that as I hit the pack, the whirlwind's completing, I get my 4 stacks of it, and I can immediately use my rampage cleaving rather than single target. All right, so check this out. So we go in, boom, rampage. Oh, sorry. Go in, rampage. Now you see I have 1, 2, 3 stacks of whirlwind left because I rampaged. Now I'm going to use blade storm after I use spear. So it's spear and then blade storm, because you want the spear down to increase the crit damage of your next abilities, which is going to be blade storm. After blade storm ends, we're going to use 2 raging blows, which is 2 of those whirlwind stacks, and then the last one goes to rampage, which is going to be increased by 40% from slaughtering strikes, 2 stacks, and then also 50% from brutal finish. Okay, and this is the multi-target rotation for Slayer. Now, for priority, number 1 priority in everything for warrior is going to be you're enraged. You want to be enraged. The whole point of your mastery percentage, is that your mastery percentage is when you're enraged, that's the percentage that your damage is increased. Okay, so you always want to be enraged, because if not, you're losing maybe 50% damage, 55%, whatever your mastery percentage is, but it adds up to a lot, and so enrage is the most important thing. Second is, if you're in AoE, you need to make sure that you have whirlwind stacks, or else your abilities just aren't cleaving and you're just doing single target. So number 2 priority is to just make sure you have whirlwind on. Okay. 3 is going to be sudden death, when any of those 4 conditionals that we mentioned in the last slide, which I wrote out here as well, are needing to be met, because you need to maintain those the sudden death conditionals, basically. Number 4 is just that you rampage if you're at or above 100 rage, or your enrage is about to fall off, so that you can reset your enrage timer. Number 5 is going to be to bloodthirst. So BT is bloodthirst. Bloodthirst of vicious contempt is talented, and the enemy's below 35% HP. So that is what I told you about in the talents, where you can drop your cleave and take vicious contempt in raid on pure single target. If the target's below 35%, you can use vicious contempt, bloodthirst as a prio over raging blow. Number 6 is just going to be full send raging blow. It has a lot of talents that buff it. It does a lot of damage, so just send raging blow. After that, you'll fill with bloodthirst, and then if there's anything that, like, if you run out of globals, you don't have any raging blow, you don't have any blood, nothing, you can go ahead and just send whirlwind as a filler. Usually it'll be rare, but it does happen. You could just throw out a whirlwind. Okay, next is going to be the Thane Mythic Plus talents. So this here is the Mountain Thane Mythic Plus talents. It's pretty similar to last tier. I just wanted to mention that instead of gathering clouds, which increases your raging blow and your execute damage, and also generates lightning strikes, generate 3 extra rage, those 3 things in our current form of Mountain Thane are kind of irrelevant. And you'll see in the priority, we are not prioritizing execute at all, and we are hardly prioritizing raging blow. And because of our Thunderblast usage, we are not worried about rage at all either. So those 3 things are kind of irrelevant. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to swap. Sorry, that was Thorm's Might. We're going to swap from that to Gathering Clouds, which is just that lightning strikes 30% more often. So no more Thorm's Might in that keystone middle section there. We're going to go for Gathering Clouds, which is the little lightning bolt that you see there towards the bottom. I also mentioned that you can drop Unbridled Ferocity, which is underneath Anger Management down there, the left keystone talent down there in the bottom right of the screenshot. You could drop that for 1 point in critical thinking. It'll give you an extra 1% crit chance, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's something. And it'll also give you an extra 5% crit damage on your Raging Blow, which that's a little bit less important. But it is possible to swap between the two of those. It just depends on how you want to play. And then lastly, for this slide, Champion Spear can be comfortably dropped for Thunderous Roar for comfort. So Spear is a slight gain, like I mentioned, for Slayer, but just know that you can run either. But the Champion Spear has a Keystone talent that increases your crit strike damage during the window, and if you want to use that, you'll see much bigger burst out of it, and it amounts to a little bit of extra damage. Alrighty, let's get into the Mountain Thane rotation and Prio. For this, I'm going to play the video again first, and then we'll talk about the priority here on the left. So in this, you're going to see me activate my Recklessness and Avatar macro, and then charge in. As I charge, I use a Whirlwind. Even though it's a Thunderclap build, I use Whirlwind, which does do decent damage. It adds up. But I do that to get cleave stacks so that I can immediately Rampage, throw down my Ravager, throw down my Spear, and then just start blasting, Thunder blasting. So you'll see it here. So you see I used a Whirlwind. You see in the action tracker, I used a Whirlwind to get my stacks so that I don't have to waste a global while I'm in the pack. I already used it during my charge. So then I'm going to Rampage and then throw down all of my offensive buffs like Ravager and Spear, and then I'll start Thunder Blasting and hoping for procs and resets. Okay. There goes Ravager. There goes Spear on everything, and then we're looking for resets. If we don't get them, that's okay. In this, we just want to be spamming Bloodthirst to try to proc Thunder Blast to be used every time it's ready, because that's our big damage. So for the priority for this, number one, just like the priority from before, Enrage. We need to be enraged. The damage increased by mastery percentage is unmatched from any other priority you could have. You need to be enraged for everything you do. Number two is going to be to Thunder Blast. Because of the 4-set, this is now by far our biggest damage ability. It has the chance to get an instant reset that you can just keep spamming as much as you'll get the 35% reset, and it pumps damage. So Thunderblast is second in the priority. Number three is going to be Thunderclap, and this is only if you're out of cleave stacks and you're in AoE, so you need to make sure that you're cleaving. So even if you don't have a Thunderblast, if you have multiple enemies around you and you run out of cleave stacks, your next prio in this list is going to be to Thunderclap to get those cleave stacks going so you can start hitting multiple targets. Number four is Bloodthirst. So BT is Bloodthirst. If no Thunderblast charges, or the crit tracker weak aura is triggered, or an enemy is below 35% HP. So the number one goal here is that Bloodthirst has a chance to proc Thunderblast to be used. If you don't have two Thunderblast charges, and especially if you don't have one Thunderblast charge, you need to use Bloodthirst on cooldown to try to get that proc to make it so that you can use it instead of having to use Thunderclap. The crit tracker weak aura will light up when it's above 85% crit chance for the Bloodthirst, so just definitely use it when it lights up. And then for Vicious Contempt, which we do take in Thane, it'll be great to use Bloodthirst when they're below 35% HP for that 50% increased damage. Number five is going to be Rampage. When you're over 100 Rage or Enrage is about to fall off, you don't want to overcap too hard on Rage. And of course, Enrage is the most important thing, so you need to be using it to make sure you're maintaining your Enrage. Number six is that Bloodthirst, especially if crit weak aura is going off. So if you're getting that 85% proc, or if you just Bloodthirst in general because it does good damage and also has a chance to proc those Thunderblasts, so that's your next in prio. Number seven is just going to be our filler. It's Raging Blow. Raging Blow is not very prio like Slayer is here in Mountain Thane. We're really prioing Bloodthirst big time. So just use Raging Blow whenever you don't have a Thunderblast up, a Rampage, or a Bloodthirst. 8 is going to be Bloodthirst when there's 2 stacks of Thunderblast and no crit tracker weak aura. So if you're not getting the 85% ding from the weak aura, and you already have 2 stacks of Thunderblast, that's where Bloodthirst would then fall down to number 8, because Raging Blow does still do more damage. So if you don't have any of those other conditionals for Bloodthirst, you can keep using Raging Blow to stack up that crit tracker. And then number 9 is just the Thunderclap. If you're out of globals even if you don't need the cleave, you can always just thunderclap to just grab some extra damage while you wait for something to come back off of cooldown. On to the next. Trinket options. So I do have an entire video on a trinket tier list, which I coincidentally put out 6 hours before they did a ton of trinket tuning. But these are the standout trinkets that I would say for Fury in this tier so far. So I'll just go through each of them and what they do and why they seem good. So Improvised C4 and Peacemaker. We used this all last tier. The reason it's good is because every minute your first ability causes you to start exploding for 15 seconds and gives you a burst of crit strike. And then every time you explode, you get an extra second up to 15 times. So it's basically a 30-second buff every minute. So it's got very high uptime. And that tends to line up pretty well with our cooldowns because we farm back Recklessness so quickly that we tend to get the explosions in Recklessness windows, like always. That being said, if you have bad timing or you have downtime between packs or something, it may line up to where it's not very beneficial for you and you get an explosion of it like when you have no cooldowns rolling. So that is one downside of this, and it was just nerfed a little. So keep that in mind for Pacemaker here. Next, we'll go to the Arakara Sackbrood. So this trinket is a haste trinket instead of strength. And then it's your abilities have a chance to start the sack, releasing an egg which grants you primary stat, and then after 1 minute, the egg hatches and the broods attack your targets, inflicting some damage. They just buffed it and increased the damage that's done, the end there, by 20%, which is nice. It's still not a ton, but it's something. But the primary stat feels great, and the haste from the trinket feels great. So this is almost like a no-brainer trinket, although there are other options, but it's very good. Okay, next we'll talk about Astral Antenna. This one gives you strength, and it basically has a chance to send an orb your way. Like there'll be an orb that starts floating towards you. Eventually it'll reach you, but basically it just starts coming towards you, and then when you pick it up, it gives you a ton of crit strike for 10 seconds, and then it can happen multiple times. It's a good trinket. I've been running with it here and there, and it feels good. So definitely a viable option. Curstone Idol I put on here. It got nerfed big time. It used to be much better, but with that being said, it's the only minute and 30-second trinket in the entire rotation, and since Avatar is on a strict minute and 30-second cooldown, it lines up perfect. I haven't had any chances to test it post nerf, but it'll definitely enhance your big cooldowns on Avatar, so that will be nice. But whether or not it beats out these other trinkets is to be seen. So take this one with a grain of salt and just see how it goes. But if you want an on-use trinket that you can, add into like a macro, or well, really this one's a very small time channel, so you wouldn't really be able to macro it. You just have to use it when you get into a pack. But it gives you crit strike, and then it also does AoE damage. It slams the ground, and then based on how many enemies you hit, it gives you more crit strike. So really good in Mythic Plus for that. Next is the Perfidious Projector. This one gives you haste, which is nice, similar to the Sackbrood. And then it's a 2-minute on-use trinket that pretty much spawns like this little person, this little I guess projection that just blasts the pack, or if it's a boss, it blasts the boss for, it's like 11 million damage right now in current tuning at 723. And then the damage gets increased by 30% per enemy up to 5 enemies, basically. So it can be increased by 150%. So I think it was doing like 25 million damage in big packs, but it's split between the people. So it's not like it can hit 30 targets for like 25 million. It's not like that. There's a cap on it. In Mythic Plus, the damage wasn't anything crazy. It was like 2.4% of my damage, the active. The haste is nice. I think this one may be more usable in Raid, where when you use it, it's like an 11 million damage hit to single target, which will be nice. So keep an eye on this one for the Raid. And I mean, maybe not terrible for Mythic Plus. I did some testing on it. I like the others better, but it's up there. Next, we have Solea's Secret Technique. So this is a strength trinket. You use it on a party member, and their highest secondary stat, you get like X amount of it. I think it's 2,300 of it or something like that for 30 minutes. So it's a very high uptime trinket. You get that secondary stat for a long time, which is nice. And then it also gives them a small amount of that. It's like 270 or something close to that number of that same stat. So this is a nice set it and forget it trinket, passive basically. I mean, it's technically an on use, but you use it once and then you're good for 30 minutes. Definitely a competitive one. And then Unyielding Nether Prism is the last one. I haven't gotten to use this one since like post the recent tuning. But before tuning, the passive damage that it does, it does like a proc damage where it does AoE damage split between the pack and then increases based on how many people are in the pack. It was doing like 3.5% of my overall, which is actually pretty good. And then it stacks up as you're using abilities. It has the chance to get a stack, and it'll stack up to 18 stacks. And then when you use it, like the on use, you'll get, it's like 3,500 strength times however many stacks you had. So it can be like a huge lump sum of strength being gained when you use it. Now, in my minute and 30 windows for Avatar, I was getting like 12 or 13 stacks on average, so it wasn't, our cooldowns weren't quite long enough to get up to 15 or 18 stacks. That'd probably be better for somebody with a 3-minute cooldown or maybe even 2-minute cooldown, so keep that in mind, but it still felt really good. It's a nice trinket. Couple of important talents that I wanted to make sure you all understood. So number one is Unrelenting Assault. This is for Slayer, and it's when you execute a target that you've marked for execution, you both reduce the cooldown of Blade Storm by 5 seconds and apply 2 stacks of Overwhelmed, which is that damage increase that stacks up to 10, to the target per stack of marked for execution consumed. So this is the one that we were explaining as one of the conditionals for sudden death, where you want to be using it when there's 3 stacks of marked for execution. So it'll give you 5, 10, 15 seconds off of your Blade Storm, and also apply 2 stacks per stack of 2 stacks of Overwhelm per stack of marked. So if you consume 3 stacks of marked for execution, you're going to put 6 stacks of Overwhelmed on the target, which is nice. Next is going to be Vicious Contempt. So I crossed this out here because I couldn't find the most recent updated one. It's actually on here as a conduit, which is gross, but this is just showing Bloodthirst is dealing 50% increased damage to enemies who are below 35% health when you talent into this. So just wanted to show that here, make sure everybody understands that's what this Vicious Contempt is. Next, we'll do Avatar of the Storm. So this is for Mountain Thane. It's casting Avatar grants you 2 charges of Thunderblast and resets the cooldown of Thunderclap. While Avatar is not active, Lightning Strikes have a 10% chance to grant you Avatar for 4 seconds. Okay, so whenever you get those random Avatar procs, this is what's causing that. And then also, if you ever have a Thunderblast in your pocket and you have Avatar ready, you can do like your own little, I guess, like pseudo Thunderblast reset of your own. If you Thunderblast and see that you don't get a reset proc from your 4 set, and then Avatar right away and Thunderblast again, it's like immediate. So it's something you can mess with. I just wanted to show you that when you use Avatar, you instantly get a Thunderblast proc. So if you have a Thunderblast, use it and then use Avatar right away and use it again. It's kind of like your own little reset. You just don't want to overwrite your 4 set reset by using Avatar. So make sure if you're going to use Thunderblast that you don't get a reset proc before you use Avatar, basically. All right, next, Overwhelming Blades. This is another Slayer talent. Each strike of Blade Storm applies Overwhelm to all enemies affected, increasing damage you deal to them by 1% for 20 seconds with a max of 10 stacks. So this is the talent that's associated with Overwhelm. In Multitarget, I was seeing mostly that my Blade Storm would put like 8 or 9 stacks of Overwhelmed on the target, so that's almost at the max stacks. On single target, it was more like 5 or 6. It just depends how many times your Blade Storm is going to strike, which I think is based off of your haste. So I just wanted you to understand how Overwhelm works and how it's applied. It's also applied, as you saw in the other talent that we went over, from consuming stacks of marked for execution with your sudden deaths. So that's how Overwhelmed is applied. And then now you can see how the damage can stack up to 10 stacks. Next is Champion's Might. So this is the spear talent that I wanted to go over. So it's the duration of your champion's spear is increased by 2 seconds, and you deal 25% increased crit strike damage to targets chained to your spear. So spear, unfortunately, only chains 5 targets. But when you do throw your spear down, those 5 targets, when you, let's say, for example, you throw spear down and then you start thunder blasting, or let's say you use blade storm, those 5 targets that are chained are going to take 25% increased damage whenever you crit with whichever of those 2 abilities you're using. So that's where a lot of that massive burst damage comes in from using spear. So I wanted y'all to understand and see that little talent there that maybe you hadn't noticed before. Next, we'll talk about Slaughtering Strikes. So it's that Raging Blow causes every strike of your next rampage to deal an additional 20% damage, stacking up to 5 times. So this is the one I kept mentioning. After a Blade Storm, you try to use as many Raging Blows as you can before Enrage falls out. And each time you get one in, it's going to increase the strikes of your next rampage by 20% each. So that's Slaughtering Strikes. And then lastly, Brutal Finish for Fury is going to be that your next rampage after Blade Storm ends deals 50% additional damage. So that one kind of goes hand in hand with the Slaughtering Strikes there, and you can see how that damage adds up to create like a massive rampage at the end of that light buildup. Okay, so that's going to be it for important talents. And then one of our last slides here is going to be tips and tricks. So first, for Slayer, you want to try to have a Whirlwind into Rampage before you Blade Storm, so that you, number 1, have 3 Whirlwind stacks left over after your Blade Storm, which allows you to then, with the 3 stacks that you have left over, cast 2 Raging Blows and then a Rampage. That'll give you 2 stacks of Slaughtering Strikes on that Rampage, and the Rampage will be cleaved still. You also want to make sure that you Whirlwind and then Rampage before you Blade Storm, so that you're getting your Enrage reset right before you use Blade Storm. Because even though you cast Bloodthirst inside of your Blade Storm, they only have a chance to reset your Enrage window. So it is possible that if you don't Rampage right before Blade Storm starts, you may actually run out of Enrage, and then your blades, the back end of your Blade Storm will be unenraged, which you'll be losing damage. So that's another reason that's important. Second thing is that when entering packs or bosses with 0 enrage and no combat trigger, you will need to enter combat before doing your opening CD macro, like your Recklessness Avatar macro, and then charging, or else you'll not have enough rage for a rampage. It can cause things to be awkward, and you can lose a global, or just be awkwardly standing there like, oh, I need it. And then you might even use some of your cooldowns unenraged. I know I've done that on accident because I'm like, oh, I didn't rampage. I just need this. I need to start blasting. Either make sure that you're in combat before you do your opener, or use Heroic Throw to force the combat as the boss is being pulled. And then, funny me, I forgot a parenthesis here. I hate when I do that. Anyway. I talked about this earlier, and you saw the Heroic Throw being used, but yeah, this is really important, especially in a raid setting with a boss like Sprocketmonger Lockenstock, where when your tank pulls the boss does like a little wind up before you actually get into combat. So if you charge in right away, you're not going to get your full enrage or your full rage amount. Third thing is use Whirlwind during your charge because it's free damage, and will also activate your Meat Cleaver stacks, your Whirlwinding. It's primarily good for allowing your first Rampage, which is used with the intention of getting enraged, to be cleaved rather than single target. So as you're charging in, it's literally a free global. You might lose like 0.25 seconds as you hit the pack if you Whirlwind mid-charge, because as you get to them, you're finishing up your Whirlwind animation. And so it's like free damage. It actually adds up, and you should definitely look into doing it. Fourth thing is using an @self macro for abilities like Ravager and Spear. I talked about this a little earlier. But basically, as melee, will always be wherever the action is. So as far as casting your Spear on your feet, it's not really that big of a deal because my feet are always going to be right in the pack because I'm melee. I have to be in the pack. So same thing with Ravager. So I just like casting everything at my feet so that I don't have to worry about accidentally throwing it on terrain or my mouse going wonky and throwing it like into another room on accident. It's all happened before a ton of times. So I just think it's so much easier. Set the macro and just click your keys, and it'll send it at your feet on its own. And then last, find a plater profile with the plater add-on that you enjoy using. I believe I use Jundies plater. You can look it up, Jundies. I think that's who I use. Make sure it'll show you when you have an ability cast on you so that you can spell reflect things effectively for extra damage. And then I can make a separate video on this if needed. But this is important. The damage from spell reflect adds up. And there's a lot of things, although not super useful so far, that I've picked up on. But there is a decent amount of things in this set of dungeons that you can spell reflect. We'll see if they really amount to anything. I haven't seen too much from my testing, but there is some. Okay, and lastly, just have a great 11.2 season. I want to go over some quick plans that I have for 11.2. I want to do things like voiceover walkthrough guides of each raid boss. I was thinking about doing something like parsing guides. Like I'm not a 100 parser, but I tend to purple parse or like in the 90s, and so I thought it could be fun to do like, hey, this is where I'm using my cooldowns and why, and how to pump out the most damage possible, and just go through step by step for bosses, like a little bit of a dissection of a boss as Fury. Thought that could be fun. Spell reflect guides for dungeons I think could be cool. I have a lot of ideas and Mythic Plus tips, stuff like that. So if you guys have any suggestions on things that I could do to make your enjoyment even higher, just let me know. But just know I have some fun things coming for 11.2. I'm really looking forward to it. I appreciate everybody for hanging out. The channel's been going great. I'm loving it, and so I'm going to keep doing it. And just know, I think when I look, it's like 20% of the people that watch the videos are subscribed. So if you're not subscribed, please think about subscribing for more content. It helps me when I look at the analytics to know that people are wanting more and wanting to come back and stay for more. So just hitting the subscription button is a huge help. I appreciate everything you guys do. Thank you for being here. Let me know what you think, and I will always take any constructive criticism or feedback that you have. I'll see y'all in Koresh. That's where we're heading, right? And yeah, keep pumping. Have a great time. Peace.